I was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance, manic depression.
They diagnosed me with having ADD.
He told me I had conduct disorder,
ADHD,
mild depression,
major depression,
manic depressive,
borderline personality disorder,
compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia, depression,
sleep disorder, identity problem disorder.
But all of these so-called diseases are just made up. They're just fabricated. They're fictions of psychiatry imagination.
What would psychiatrists do without their labels? They couldn't pretend to be real doctors anymore, you know? Neither could psychologists, you know? Diagnosing, what a godlike thing to do. Making diagnoses, and here's your treatment, a pill. Because so far they're not proving that any so-called mental illnesses exist. These are labels, and that's all they are.
But without proof, you can't have credibility. So psychiatrists manufacture their own.
It's based on a grab bag of checklists for disorders that are published in a book called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are no statistics in this book, by the way. That just makes it sound more scientific.
They create this cluster of disease, and they get together and they vote. Is this a disease? All in favor say aye.
The American Psychiatric Association is the publisher and owner and wealthy owner of DSM. They've made a great deal of money on DSM.
Since the first edition of the DSM, the number of mental disorders voted into psychiatry's diagnostic manual has grown to 374. And with each new disorder, psychiatrists create yet another way to defraud the public.
If you have 27 ways to bill in the DSM, that's 27 ways to bill. If you have 300, that's 300 ways to bill. So you can pretty much find anyone walking on the street that could fit into a DSM somehow.
When you build an insurance company, you can't say the word. You've got to send in a number. And they have numbers for the most ridiculous things. You know, like arguing with your mother or peeing in the bed.
Adolescent rebellion disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. Arithmetic learning disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. General anxiety disorder is a recent diagnosis.
The psychiatric industry takes advantage of that. They say, wow, we can get these things categorized and make it look scientific, so let's label everything. Now we have a label for it. We can put a coding. If you've ever seen a medical insurance form, everything has a code.
In DSM, it just looks like sort of some magical numbers. Of course, what we're talking about is reimbursement for mental health treatment as an illness.
The more types of codings, the more types of illnesses you can come up with, the more claims can be paid, and the more reasons for treatment, and the more reasons for revenue for the psychiatric establishment, for the hospitals, and of course, the pharmaceutical companies.
Incredibly enough, while presenting the DSM to the world as scientific fact, psychiatrists freely admit its utter lack of science.
We have no diagnostic reliable markers for almost any illness there is in the DSM.
What we're testing for in psychiatry, it's hard to say because there's nothing specifically.
But as far as a test that's clinically useful, basically we're not there yet.
We don't have any laboratory tests that we can use to determine whether somebody does or doesn't have a mental illness.
There are no good biological tests for detecting mental illness.
There is no test, there's no biopsy you can do.
There is no chemical test right now.
But there are no specific tests to confirm the diagnosis or show the improvement, like any blood tests or any x-rays or anything like that.
Oh, in my practice, I don't do any tests. I just speak with people and listen to them, and then I make a decision in what kind of illness. These diagnoses vary as widely as the psychiatrists who make them. In this hidden camera footage, a person visited several different psychiatrists, complaining of the same symptoms.
I'm extremely unorganized, and I didn't used to be. It's caused problems in the family. It's caused problems getting, I'm self-employed.
You've got ADD, ADHD, and you're depressed, and your depression is bipolar depressed.
You have a brain chemistry disorder, and it's probably genetic.
You have a lot of the symptoms of depression.
So it seems like it is a mixed picture. What that means is like we got some depressive symptoms and some, high symptoms.
If you're bipolar, I'll need to give you a mood stabilizer. We don't know. I kind of doubt it.
It's considered low-grade bipolar.
You are more of the ADD than ADHD.
And as far as medications for depression, because I would recommend that you start a medication, which are Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa.
Usually Propylene XR is pretty good.
They'll give you some Lexapro in the morning and some trazodone at night.
Lamictal is a better medication for that. It works on your depression also.
But the treatment for any bipolar cycling is the same. The lithium,
Remeron is another one.
Trazodone,
Secretol,
Depakote,
Wellbutrin,
Lexapro,
Lamictal,
Equitroid,
Depakote,
lithium,
Ambien.
You may need an antidepressant also with your Lamictal.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
To a certain degree, it's trial and error.
You never know if it's the right drug.
How many people have I cured? Well, there are no real cures right now in psychiatry.
I have cured none of my patients.
We're always challenged by our lack of knowledge.
I mean, in fact, we don't know what the causes of mental illness are.
Most mental illnesses, we do not know the cause.
Of course, it would be nice to know exact reasons of disorders, but maybe in the future.
I'm the Director of Research at the American Psychiatric Association. We don't know the etiology of really any of the mental disorders at the present time.
DSM-5 is coming out. It's grown to 10 times its original size, and it labels everybody. I could find 5 diagnoses that would fit you or anybody else.
Compare this to the research methods of pathology, a real science that discovers real diseases using a wide variety of precise diagnostic tests.
We do millions of laboratory tests as well as the structural examination and the microscopic examination. It's a whole series of applied scientific procedures. In the case of psychiatry, there isn't any laboratory tool that can precisely identify a psychiatric disease and allow it to be classified.
It's not as if there's some study of tissue or some study of the body or some study of matter. These are all categories which are made up. They're simply made up. They don't exist in nature. They're decided upon by psychiatrists and voted on.
Psychiatrists are not the only ones who benefit from the DSM. Wherever you find a psychiatric diagnosis, you'll find a psychiatric drug.
The pharmaceutical corporations now contribute enormous sums of money for the education of psychiatric residents and for the support of research by their professors, so that psychiatry today has become in America, has become very largely learning of which drug to use with which disease or disorder.
This to me is completely unethical, untenable, unacceptable for this to occur. The web of money is all over the place. It has compromised psychiatry, and now it's compromising psychology, and worst of all, it's compromising the patients.
In 2006, a study revealed that 56% of all psychiatrists deciding what disorders to list in the next DSM had financial ties to at least one drug company. Today, we see the consequences: a barrage of drugs, each one targeted at an invented disorder that is backed by an arbitrary diagnosis found in the DSM.
The fact that it is couched in the language of science without necessarily having any of the scientific data or underpinnings to justify it is as threatening as anything we've seen to date.
And psychiatry's latest and most expensive ploy to fool the public by imitating legitimate medicine? Brain scans.
We can scan all the brains we want to. The fact that we see changes in different people's brains, changes in functioning, doesn't mean that we've discovered anything that has its origin in the brain. It just means that we're seeing changes, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the brain.
They have no reliable measures about precise blood flow patterns for any of the psychiatric disorders using any of the scans.
It's marketing. This is marketing. This is not science. This is incredibly effective.
effective marketing has nothing to do with science.
Psychiatrists and psychologists use the DSM to label 450 million people worldwide as mentally ill, a total equal to the populations of France, Italy, Germany, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and Russia combined. While sales of the psychiatric drugs they push have topped $80 billion annually, funding from world governments for these patients gross psychiatry over $250 billion a year. And much of this money comes from the diagnosis and drugging of our most trusting and vulnerable.